Right. So this is about an enterprise architecture framework model using ArchiMate tool because as in when we are working on architecture perspective, there are different types of architectures we have like enterprise architecture. In this enterprise architecture, we have some business architecture, systems, applications, data architecture, all that. In addition to that, even we have solution architecture roles as well. Developing a technical roadmap for any application comes under solution architecture. Now, in today's session, I am going to discuss about what are the different elements that are involved when we are developing an enterprise architecture, especially in a larger extent. Because being an architect role, when we are working on enterprise architecture, there are different tools as I told you, right? So we have used TOGAF framework can be used at the same time, ArchiMate, all that. So these are the key elements we have to use when we are working on the enterprise architecture part. So this is about the first one. This is about the motivational elements. Motivational elements is the first aspect when we are creating an enterprise architecture. Like we need to discuss about the kind of stakeholders, right? So these stakeholders can be an internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. Next, what are the different drivers that are required from us to use it? These drivers, I can call it as business drivers and all. What are the different assessments we have? What are the different goals that are required for us to achieve? These goals I can consider and call it as business goals. And what must be the outcome here? Followed by the kind of value that is required to have some understanding over the business value. At the same time, the kind of constraints, whatever the high level and low level requirements, which are essentially important, followed by the kind of principles that are involved. All these things are comes under the motivational elements. So when we are developing an enterprise architecture for an organization level from the larger context, understanding about the motivational factors is one of the key and important element. So I'm talking about business drivers, as I mentioned you, value, stakeholder, requirements, goal, constraints. These parts has to be taken. Next, we need to understand the composite elements. Composite elements majorly focusing on the location. So location, grouping, right? All these things are comes under the composition elements. Next, after composition elements, the next was about the implementation and migration elements. Let's say, for example, we are working on the migration projects. Let's say from old legacy systems to the new application, we are transforming. When we are transforming this from old legacy systems to the new application, it's always important for us to understand how the migration process will be taken place, wherein by creating some staging database, using different ETL tools to extract the data, transform the data, load the data, extracting the old images, and modifying those, right? So, and as well as converting these into supportive images as well as videos or files which are compatible to the targeted system what you are going to develop, right? This is where generally migration comes into picture. So when it comes to the migration as far as the implementation of an application from the enterprise level perspective, it's all important for us to understand about the implementation events, whatever are required here. At the same time, we must be knowing about the gap. This is where generally as is to be come into picture. As is nothing but the existing one, to be nothing but the one which you are about to develop. This is where generally we call it as gap analysis stands for. So implementation and as well as migration elements, all these things and comes under the gap. Next about the work package, what are the different work packages we have? What are the different deliverables do we have? I'm talking about the project deliverables end of the day, right? So unless until if we don't understand the project deliverables, then there is no point in learning this. So understanding the deliverables is also one of the key and important element, one to be known with. So this is what generally the implementation and migrations element comes into picture when we are working on the enterprise architecture part. This is next one. Next, after that, we must be knowing about the business elements. So business elements majorly trying to understand about the business interfaces. What is that are we using in the organization level? Followed by this, we should understand about the lines of services we are performing. This is where business services comes into picture. What are the different business services we have? Followed by this, how businesses are being collaborating or interacting. At the same time, what are the different business functions we have and how the business process will continue? What are the different business roles that are involved in it? And what are the different business events that we are performing? Followed by the kind of product representation. Everything comes under the business elements. So business elements majorly focusing on the business level perspective. Whatever the business level understanding, that is something which you must be having. This is all comes under the business elements part. Next, about the strategy elements. Strategy elements majorly focusing on three different areas. One is about the resources, because these resources we can categorize normally into two different parts. One is about the technical resource, second is a financial resource. But here we will be focusing more on the manpower, technical resources and manpower resources. Building the strategy for an enterprise is essentially important. So for that, what are the resources that are essentially needed that will be taken into consideration. Next, capability, right? So business capability and enterprise capability, business capability matrix, one should understand, followed by the kind of course of action that is something which we wants to be implemented. This is all comes under the strategy elements. So business elements are important. At the same time, strategy elements are important even. Next, application elements. When you're talking about application elements, there are different elements that are involved in it. So because let's say, for example, when we are developing some application architecture, because in the beginning of the session, I told you, enterprise architecture consists of business architecture, systems architecture, application architecture, and data architecture. So when it comes to the application architecture, what are the different applications that are involved in it? And how these application interfaces looks like and what are the services that application performs. At the same time, how are these applications are interacting and collaborating? Because when we are working in for let's say, for example, if you're taking some banking as a customer, okay, so we use different applications. Maybe for core banking, we use a different application, and some application may be for CRM process, we are using it. Some may be for ERP and some may be for other things. In these, there will be some on-premise applications we have. At the same time, we have some cloud applications also. But make sure these are all not something standalone, but these are all interconnected and integrated, right? So interconnection and integrated is what something it was. So application collaboration and interaction of these applications is one of the core and important element as far as applications are concerned, which we need to know it. Next, what are the different components that we are using? What are the application components or the functions are we using? What are the different events we have? Everything comes under the application elements. So application architecture and application layer when you are developing, it's always important for us to understand about what are the different application elements that are essentially required and that are to be noted with. Next, technology elements. Technology elements majorly focusing on the technical perspective, wherein you must be knowing about the infrastructure part, right? So what are the technology interfaces we are using? Now and then we are moving towards cloud. Okay, on-premise to the cloud, we are transforming many of the processes and projects. But still some projects we are using on-premise for various reasons. But we are moving towards cloud environment. So hence need to understand about the technology interfaces followed by the technology services what we have and how the technology is being collaborated as well as interaction with. At the same time, we need to know about the system software, system design as well as the software we are developing, followed by the kind of artifacts that are involved in technology. When you are implementing a technology, what are the different artifacts that are essentially required? At the same time, communication among the networks, routers, firewalls, right? So how these were communicated, especially when we are managing the infrastructure by managing some data centers in the organization level. So how this can be communication we are creating and we are developing. At the same time, when you are following a cloud environment, we have some services like IaaS services. We have infrastructure as a service. Those are all comes under the communication network point of view. Followed by this, how the application path settings has to be involved in, right? So what are the different settings that are required for us to perform? This is all comes under the path settings. So these are the technology elements one you need to be known with. Last but not least, physical elements. This is something required. Physical elements majorly focusing on the kind of facility you are providing. I'm talking about the infrastructure facility we are providing, followed by the kind of equipment which is essentially required to use it. What are the different materials that are required to use to establish an enterprise architecture itself are concerned. Next, we need to know about the distribution network. Everything comes under this category. This is what generally an enterprise architectural understanding from an enterprise architect level, right? So when you want to implement this in a larger context in the organization, this is something, these are the different elements, something you must be knowing. You must be knowing about the physical elements, you must be knowing about the application elements, you must be knowing about the technology elements, you must be knowing about the strategy elements, business elements. All these elements are essentially required, one should be known with. This is all about an enterprise architecture point of view, motivation elements, all that stuff, right? Implementation elements, all that. So this is where generally an enterprise architecture, the detailed understanding over one should understand. If you want to learn enterprise architecture or if you want to learn about enterprise architecture, so as in when I told you, right? So we have different tools now and then we are using something like TOGAF, ArchiMate, and earlier we used to have a tool called Jackman, right? So Jackman framework we used to have from for a very long time we are using Jackman framework. Now and then for a long time we are using TOGAF Archimate, right? So different models are we using to develop an enterprise architecture which is essentially required. So if you want to transform our career towards architecture side, as in when as I told you, right? So if you want to become an enterprise architect, it's always important for us to understand about the kind of elements which are important, and this is what are these elements were all about. This is all about the session today, and tomorrow I'm going to discuss about what are the application elements do we have, and from the application architecture point of view that I'm going to discuss in tomorrow's session. Okay, see you. Bye.